Welcome, clinical professionals. Look, if you're stepping into the world of academic publishing, or maybe you're prepping a massive clinical project right now, you know the feeling. Staring at a completely blank page at 2 a.m. after an absolutely grueling shift, it can feel incredibly daunting, literally terrifying. But today, we're going to reframe that entirely. In this explainer, we're going to treat the abstract, kind of intimidating academic writing process exactly like building a house. It's not magic, it's simply a series of tangible structural steps. From pouring the foundation to framing the rooms, we're going to give you the ultimate builder's blueprint for clinical scholarly writing.
Okay, let's dive into this. And honestly, there's no better place to start than with this incredibly blunt quote from clinical author Joan Bonnell. Good writing takes a lot of work. I really want to establish this right off the bat to set realistic expectations. Great clinical writing isn't just something that effortlessly flows out of you after a 12-hour shift. No way. It requires planning, discipline, and some serious intentional effort. But here's the good news. By using the tools we're about to explore, all that hard work transforms into a highly organized and honestly, a highly rewarding process.
So here is the blueprint for today's explainer. First, the academic writing foundation. Second, planning your clinical project. Third, the ethics of authorship. Fourth, navigating group writing roles. And finally, structuring the research report.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the academic writing foundation, the building codes. Before you can even think about pouring the concrete, you've got to understand the strict foundational rules that govern how we communicate in academic and clinical settings. Academic writing is just distinctly different from our everyday chatter. It rests on 7 key features. It must be structured, evidenced, critical, precise, balanced, objective, and formal. I really want you to focus on that first word for a second, structured. Think of your writing like the house we're building. The introduction is the front door, bringing the reader inside. And every paragraph after that is a different room serving a very specific purpose. You wouldn't just start nailing random boards together without a plan, right? Well, you can't just throw data onto a page without logically guiding your reader from room to room. Plus, your claims must be evidenced by citations, and they have to be critical, which means you aren't just describing information, you're actively evaluating it. Now, depending on where you're at in your career, you might be tackling one of 2 types of writing. Student academic writing is usually aimed at university tutors. The goal there is basically to demonstrate your learning. Expert academic writing, on the flip side, is aimed at your clinical peers with the ultimate purpose of creating and sharing entirely new knowledge. But here is the absolute secret. While the audience and the purpose shift, the high standards and requirements remain exactly identical. Think of it like driving. A student driver has to obey the exact same speed limits and traffic lights as a totally expert driver. Your writing has to strictly follow those 7 foundational features we just ran through, regardless of what your current title happens to be. Moving on to Section 2, planning your clinical project, drafting the blueprint. As a clinician, your hours are incredibly limited. You literally do not have the time to sit there and stare at a blinking cursor. So before you write a single paragraph, you need to brainstorm the antecedents to your clinical problem. And this brilliantly illustrates the big picture. Visual tools like concept maps, fishbone diagrams, and planning arrows are going to be your absolute best friends here. Concept mapping, for instance, lets you visually unpack your problem and its context. By sketching out how different systemic factors influence your topic, the totally messy reality of the clinic suddenly transforms into a neat, structured problem that is ready to be solved on paper. To keep that momentum going, you can follow a really logical, chronological progression of pre-writing tools. First up, you engage in problem solving by asking the right questions. Things like, what if, and I wonder whether. Next, you move into concept mapping to actually visualize all the aggravating factors and how they interrelate. Finally, and I highly recommend this for large clinical projects that stretch over time, you track your process using decision trails or logs. These are essentially factual records of the choices you've made along the way. They act like an anchor, reminding you exactly why you chose a specific path when you finally sit down to write that formal report weeks or months later. I want to just pause for a second and ask you directly, what exactly will you be doing in your project? Who are you writing this for? And what are your specific qualifications to tackle this topic? If you can't answer those reflective questions right now, honestly, you aren't ready to build. Clarifying your clinical problem, deeply understanding your specific audience, whether that's a review board, a journal, or your peers, and making sure you have the right skills in place, doing that upfront will make the actual writing phase infinitely smoother. Let's shift gears to Section 3, the ethics of authorship, pulling the permits. It's a massive question. Who should actually receive credit as an author on your paper? Authorship brings immense professional rewards, career advancement, and let's be real, prestige. But with all of that comes a heavy, totally unshakable responsibility for the truthfulness and the trustworthiness of the work. You're putting your personal and professional reputation on the line, essentially vouching for the scientific integrity of the data.
So the crucial point is that medical journals rely on incredibly strict criteria to determine who gets that credit. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, or the ICMJE, has a strict four-part criteria rule. To be listed as an author, you must 1. Contribute substantially to the conception, design, or data analysis. 2. Actually draft the work or critically revise it. 3. Give final approval of the published version. And 4. Agree to be accountable for all aspects of the work's accuracy and integrity. You must meet all 4 of these criteria, no exceptions. If you only meet 3, you're a contributor to be acknowledged, but you're not an author.
Now, these strict criteria exist for a reason, to prevent major ethical breaches, like the guest author. A guest author is someone, often a department chair or someone in a position of authority, who gets listed as an author without actually meeting those 4 criteria we just discussed. As incredibly awkward as it might be in the break room, authorship cannot be given as a gift, and it absolutely cannot be seized by a superior. It's intellectually dishonest because an honorary author can't realistically take public responsibility for defending the accuracy of the paper's specific clinical content. On the total opposite end of the spectrum is the ghost author. This is an abuse where the true writer, who actually met all the criteria, is entirely hidden and left off the final byline. This happens sometimes with hired medical writers or, unfortunately, with uncredited students whose hard work gets published under their professor's name. The absolute best way to avoid these ethical traps is for faculty, students, and clinical teams to negotiate these roles openly and fairly before the clinical work even kicks off. All right, Section 4, Navigating Group Writing Roles, Managing Contractors. When you're writing as a team, there has to be a clear hierarchy. You have the first author, who typically contributes the most, drives the project forward, and coordinates the manuscript drafts. Then you have the corresponding author. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this vital liaison role. They are the ones communicating directly with the journal editor, handling the revisions, and making sure hard deadlines are actually met. Co-authors are responsible for their specific sections, but remember, they still have to defend the intellectual content of the whole paper. Finally, acknowledged contributors. These are the folks who provided great support. Maybe they collected some data or reviewed a quick draft, but they didn't meet that rigorous 4-part test for authorship.
To make sure these roles function smoothly, you've got to set ground rules immediately. Do not wait until the paper is finished to decide the author order. That's a recipe for disaster. Determine author order early, assign specific writing roles based on everyone's unique expertise, establish a firm timeline with hard deadlines, and document every single decision. By articulating these rules proactively, you prevent massive stumbling blocks later and ensure everyone feels like credit was distributed fairly. Let's move to and see how this builds to Section 5, Structuring the Research Report, the Architecture. Okay, final phase. You have the foundation, the blueprints, the permits, and your team is ready. Now it's time to erect the actual structure by pulling all your clinical research together into a formal, highly organized report. In the world of clinical science, the gold standard format is known as IMRAD. That stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. Remember our house metaphor? Well, these are the standard rooms of your academic paper. The introduction tells the reader what the problem is and why it actually matters. The methods section explains exactly how you built the study. The results room lays out the pure data you found. And finally, the discussion room evaluates what that data actually means for the field. This highly logical framework is required by most journals because it allows other clinicians to easily understand, critique, and ultimately replicate your findings in their own hospitals. Before we wrap up, we need to take a step back and remember why we even go through this rigorous, highly structured process. Your research is honestly of very little value if it just sits hidden away on your hard drive. Disseminating rigorous clinical research is absolutely essential for advancing evidence-based practice. Communicating your findings, getting them out there, is what ultimately changes patient care on the ground, improves service delivery, and even fulfills federal funding mandates that require public access to new science. You are literally building the knowledge base of your entire profession. Which leaves us with this final thought. Your clinical observations, your specific data, and your unique problem-solving insights have the potential to literally change healthcare for the better. But they can only do that if you put in the hard work to actually build that house. You now have the blueprint,
the structural foundations, the planning tools, the ethical guidelines, and the team formatting to get it done. The tools are right there in your hands. So, are you ready to write them down?